Title of this message is Be Silent, My Soul, and you'll see that it flows right from the text. But if you'd like to follow along with this morning, we'll read Psalm 62 together. Psalm 62, verse 1, My soul waits in silence for God only. From Him is my salvation. He only is my rock and my salvation, my stronghold. I shall not be greatly shaken. How long will you assail a man that you may murder him, all of you, like a leaning wall, like a tottering fence? They have counseled only to thrust him down from his high position. They delight in falsehood. They bless with their mouth, but inwardly they curse. My soul waits in silence for God only, for my hope is from Him. He only is my rock and my salvation, my stronghold. I shall not be shaken. On God my salvation, my glory rests. The rock of my strength, my refuge is in God. Trust in Him at all times, O people. Pour out your heart before Him. God is a refuge for us. Men of low degree are only vanity, and men of rank are a lie. In the balances they go up, they are together lighter than breath. Do not trust in oppression. And do not vainly hope in robbery. If riches increase, do not set your hope upon them. Once God has spoken, twice I have heard this, that power belongs to God. And loving kindness is yours, O Lord, for you recompense a man according to his work. This morning I'd like to walk through Psalm 62 together. And I'm going to really try and focus on the positive aspects. There's some negative things about this psalm, and I'm going to try to just sort of highlight those for you, but I want to focus on the positive things. But I want to start with asking a question, then I'm going to end with a question. And I start with a question because oftentimes we find this in Scripture that we are asked something, and what we are challenged to do is to think, to process, to meditate. And so instead of coming to Psalm 62 and merely just being a passive recipient, I want us to be active listeners to what God has to say here. So I'll begin with this question, and it is this: where do people look for security? Where do people look for security? When we look at the world around us and we understand we live in a fallen world, we realize that for people there is much to fear and much to be anxious for. Especially when we look at what's happening now in our world around us. There is plenty of reason for people to be afraid. There is plenty of reason for them to be anxious. There is such instability in what we see around us in the world. There is so much turmoil out there that it starts to cause turmoil in here, in our hearts and in our souls. And you really can't watch news for that long without it starting to work inside of you and start to stir up inside of you a sense of anxiety and fear about what's going on in the world. When we look around us, we find people that have a difficulty finding a calmness within, a rest within, a peace within, a composure in facing the world around them. David understands this as he approaches this in this particular psalm. And it's interesting because he makes a statement in verse 5. If you look at it with me, verse 5, the second line, he says, "For my hope is from God." I love that word, hope. Tikva in Hebrew. It means expectation, hope, even live. Now what's interesting about this particular word is that the word that it comes from kavah. Kavah in Hebrew means a cord, something that attaches to something else. In other words, we're being challenged to walk through the psalm. What is your lifeline? Where do you draw your hope from? What is your reliance in life when you look at the things around you? Oftentimes we find other people to rely on. We find possessions to rely on. We find money and riches to rely on. And David says, I'm just going to tell you that's a false sense of security. There's none to be had there. There's only one who can be your hope and your lifeline. So when we walk through the psalm, understand, David, he's given much thought to this. The terminology that he uses in the psalm reflects that he has thought very long about this and very serious about this. And we know that he's facing a difficult time. If you notice with me, just the terminology that he uses, especially when he makes designations in relation to God. Notice in the first couple verses. Verse 1, he refers to him as my salvation. Verse 2, he is my rock, my salvation, my stronghold, or my fortress. So just from those designations in and of themselves, we can sense that David is going through a difficult time. Why would he call on God as being a rock or a fortress or a stronghold if there wasn't something serious facing him? Not only that, though, if you look at verses 3 and 4, he asks this question, how long will you assail a man that you may murder him, all of you? Like a leaning wall, like a tottering fence. They have counseled only to thrust him down from his high position. This is likely a life and death situation for David. Now, we're not told in the title of the psalm, although sometimes we are in some of the psalms, we're told in the title, what is the life setting? We're not given that, but we can at least understand from these facts that we can gather from Psalm 62 that David is facing something very serious, and likely it is life and death. And there is no doubt that if we are facing something that is a life and death situation, there will be a tendency for there to be fear and anxiety to build up in us. And this is a very intriguing psalm because David is going to look through and he is going to estimate all of his resources. He's going to look at all his means of reliance. He is going to even give scrutiny to his own mindset, his own state of mind, as to what his real trust is, where is his hope really lie, what is his mindset and his affections towards God. And he's going to draw this conclusion and make this affirmation in verse 1. Notice with me, and I'm going to put it literal from Hebrew into English. Only for you, God, is there silent waiting to my soul. That's his conclusion. Only for you, God, is there silent waiting to my soul. So if we could say this, if we look at Psalm 62, what is the big idea? And I'll tell you this, and then you can take a nap, and I'll wake you up when we're done. But this is the big idea. God only is my rock and my salvation. That's it. And all of this psalm is about developing that thought. So if you notice in verses 1 and 2, my soul waits in silence for God only, for from him is my salvation. For he only is my rock, my salvation, my stronghold. He begins with this affirmation. Notice in verses 5 and 6, he is going to return to the same terminology again, but now he's talking to himself. He's giving himself, if you will, self-encouragement here, and he's speaking to himself because he needs to bolster his confidence a little bit more in the Lord. And notice verse 5, my soul, wait in silence for God only. For my hope is from him. He only is my rock and my salvation, my stronghold. I shall not be shaken. Now we'll notice the difference between verse 2 and verse 6, and we'll come to that. But David is going to walk through this, and he is going to ground all of this in the end in God's word, verse 11, and in God's ways, verse 12. And he's going to leave us hanging on the reality of who God is. Now, it's interesting because this is not some ivory tower kind of doctrine and contemplation for David. This is a real life thing. He understands the world, verses 3 and 4. He understands the menacingness of man. He understands that the world offers no reliance whatsoever, whether it's in the people, verse 9, or whether it's in possessions, verse 10, or their practices, whatever it is. There is nothing in the world that we can find that to be our reliance, our hope. Everything must be found in God. So walk with me through the psalm then, if you will. And we'll start walking through verses 1 and 2. And there is a development here. But David begins with an affirmation. I just have to say, just notice that. This is really cool. Psalms are really short for the most part. Psalm 119 is pretty lengthy. But Psalms are relatively short. And so there's only so much space in which the psalmist has to work to convey the truths that he wants to convey. So just pay attention to what he does. It's interesting to me that David is going to begin, first off, in the first 2 verses, with an affirmation. This is the testimony of a man of faith saying that security must be found in God alone. And he is going to first address the single source of security. That's God. But here's what's really intriguing to me. with all that he is facing, if you just glance back through this psalm, you will not find one prayer or one petition to God. Just think about that. He normally, when we see Psalms of David, when he's going through a difficult time, he will develop what he is facing, what he is going through. And then we will find a prayer or petition to God, asking God for something. There is no asking for God anything in this psalm. There is no petition at all. There is no fear. There is, if you will, no despair. Even though he talks about a life and death situation, there is no petition. There is just an affirmation of trust and faith. This is awesome. Because when we start walking, immediately we find a soul at rest. We find a soul at rest. So the outline is going to develop like this. And it's going to build one thought upon another. This is what Psalms does for us. We're going to do this with this psalm. We're going to first look at a single source of security. That is God alone. We're going to see the, if you will, the sufficiency of that source of security. And then we're going to see the sufficient source of security and confidence. Because we're going to see David develop and grow in his confidence in this psalm. So notice with me, it's interesting, this particular psalm, every psalm is unique. There are different techniques that are used by the psalmist to draw our attention to what is the message, right? So the beauty of this is that you can't miss what David is getting at. One of the things that he does is he uses a Hebrew word. It's ak. It doesn't sound like much. It's actually only 2 letters in Hebrew, and that's it. It's a particle, but it is, if we would say this in grammatical speech, it is a very pregnant term. It's petite, it's a particle, but it's carrying twins. There's a lot of truth involved in this word. Okay? And David uses it 6 times. So we find it in verse 1, verse 2, verse 4, verse 5, verse 6, and verse 9. And the interesting thing about this word is every single one of these verses, it is the first word in the verse. So there is no missing what David's focus is. There is no missing his message. And I'm only going to look at verses 1, 2, 5, and 6. And I'm going to translate them for you from Hebrew into English. And this is the word order that David lays them out in. Verse 1, Psalm 62. Only for God is there silent waiting for my soul. Verse 2. Only He is my rock and my salvation. Verse 5, only for God silently wait my soul. This is David talking to himself. Verse 6, only He is my rock and my salvation. Over and over, only, 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 only. There is no way that you can walk out the end of this psalm and miss the point of the passage. You just can't. Now, what's also interesting about this term is that not only does it have an affirmative aspect to it, only, alone, truly, it also reflects contrast. So when David is reflecting on this, there are, if you will, underlying contrasts that run through here. Now I'm going to just lay them out for you real quickly in regards to verse 1, verse 2, verses 5, and 6. So verse 1 goes like this. This is the underlying contrast. And we will put but yet in there and then only. And this is the significance of this word that David uses. So, looking at verse 1, there are many pressures, but yet only in God there is silence for my soul. David realizes there are all kinds of pressures going to come in life. You're going to face all kinds of situations. You're going to feel it pressing upon you. It is going to be at times overbearing, but there is only one answer in light of that. Only in God is there silence for my soul. Verse 2 then, the underlying contrast. There are many alternative strengths proposed, but yet only He is my rock. He only is my salvation, and He only is my stronghold. So with all the pressures that come, there are going to be all kinds of remedies that people are going to offer and say these are different ways, different alternative strengths. He is going to end with this particular truth, and notice how he brings our attention to it, verse 11. Once God has spoken, twice I have heard this, that power belongs to God. It's His. It's His. So the final one then is this, verses 5 and 6. As David contemplates this is the underlying contrast. And should anyone say to you that you need other strengths as well, you need to reply to them, but yet, my soul, wait in silence, for God only, He only. As David's contemplation, he looks at the situations around him. He realizes that there are all kinds of pressures that we are going to face, some of them life and death, but there is only one answer to all of that, and that is God. So there is only a single source of security in life. And David says that's God. Now he's going to talk about in this psalm, he's going to look at security tested in verses 3 through 4, that man is unreliable. He's going to return to that thought again in verses 9 and 10. We're not going to dwell on those verses this morning, but just understand that this is his point. And there are different ways that we know that people are going to try to add other forms of security into the picture for us. Even sometimes believers do this, right? They'll say, well, I trust God, but, right? There's that word, but I have to plan for the contingencies, right? So I trust God, but I also trust this and this and this and this. I trust my job. I trust my abilities. I trust my bank account. I'm not going to become fearful and anxious over the things that happen in my life or paying the bills and all these things. I know I can rely upon my own abilities, my job, my bank account, all of these things. David says, that's all false security. Your trust is amiss if you place it there at all. So David really challenges us because he comes to understand this truth. I'm going to lay this out for you, and you just chew on this for a while. If you have a pencil, write it down, pen, write it down, but it is this. This is something that David realized. He realized this. Those who trust in God only have Him and everything else. He's God. Right? He's God. Everything is His. As the psalmist says, a cattle on 1,000 hills belongs to Him. Everything is His. So if you trust in God only, you have Him and everything else. However, if you trust in Him and anything else, then you will end up without Him and nothing else. David understood this truth. This is why he wants to make sure we do not miss this point as we walk into this psalm together. And that we see it all the way through this psalm. Notice he's going to lay out the fact, not only is there a single source of security, that is in God, it is a sufficient source of security. Notice the images that he uses, if you will, in verse 2. Rock, salvation, stronghold. Now, these images reflect something for us. The second one is relatively easy for us, but I'll just tell you, it's looking at redemption or deliverance on a broader scale. But nonetheless, notice, rock, salvation, and fortress are stronghold. They reflect several things. The first one, rock, reflects security of steadfastness, stability. When all the world around you is unstable and falling apart and there is chaos, 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 and I'm just going to tell you, it is going to get worse before it gets better, there is only one who is stable. He is the rock. The rock. Not only that, He is salvation. This reflects security of deliverance. This signifies the whole process of redemption. Not just through the events that we face in life and the tragedies that we go through, the trials and tribulations, but ultimately He is the deliverer of us. When Paul prays and he reflects in Philippians chapter 1, when he talks about the fact that I'm sure that this will turn out for my deliverance, he's not talking about their being delivered from prison. He's talking about the ultimate deliverance. He saw that the events that he was going through in his life was a part of that overall deliverance of God in his life. So this is what David reveals then when he looks upon God as his rock, his salvation. He is my secure, steadfast. He is my security of deliverance, and now He is my fortress or my stronghold. This reflects security of protection. Now here's what's amazing by all these statements. David is not content to know the Lord is all of these things. Notice this, he's not content with it. He is going to act in faith in regards to these realities of who God is, and under every character he is going to lay claim to them. He is my rock, He is my salvation, He is my fortress. And he's going to call upon the people in verse 8, do the same thing. He is yours as well. And this is an awesome thought because, when I look back in my life, my parents taught me a lot about the Lord. And I saw, looking at my parents' life over the years growing up in the household I did, I saw from my parents that God was my father's rock, my father's salvation, my father's stronghold. Same thing for my mother. I saw this reality, but then I realized He is mine as well. Just as much as He was there and provided for them and took care of them and was there in the time of fear and anxiety and all that, and they could cling to Him, He was their lifeline. He is my lifeline. It was such a realization to me to realize that He is my rock. He is my stronghold. He is my hope. And we all pray for our kids to do the same, don't we? We can lead them there, right? As David does in verse 8. You can exhort people to do this. You can live your life as a pattern for them, but you can't make them do that. All we do is get down on our knees and pray. Pray and pray. So David responds to all of these, and he lays claim to all of them. He does it again in verses 6 and 7. But notice what's interesting. This sufficient single source of security, there is an element of confidence that is going to come for David. Notice verse 2. And I'm going to say this. It's unfortunate because a lot of translations don't have this word there. ESV has it, NASB has it. I didn't check King Jimmy, but I'm sure it probably has it. But a lot of other translations don't have it, and it is the word greatly. The end of verse 2, I shall not be greatly shaken. David is dealing with real life stuff. This is realism. He understood that there are going to be shaky moments in life. He understood that he did not have full composure. So verse 6, he's going to talk to himself, 5 and 6, and he's going to encourage himself, and he's going to finally say, I shall never be shaken. But he understands there are going to be times when we're going to be shaken up. But do what I do, find my confidence in the Lord. So David, in a short amount of space, he takes us on this journey of growth in himself as he walks through this. Verses 3 and 4, we're going to just scan past this, but I'm going to tell you this is security tested. Man is unreliable, verses 3 and 4. And David is going to reflect on the fact that sinful man, in opposition to the Lord, they seek to break down and we dishonor and worth and resort to lies and deceit. David experienced his fair share of sinful people. He knew that their capabilities of crime. He knew that they were capable of being false. He knew their treachery and so on. So therefore, you just can't rely upon them. You cannot bring yourself to confide in them ultimately. Later, he's going to challenge the people, pour out your heart before God, but he recognizes the fact you can't do this with sinful man. 3 things he says here, if you want to write them down. Sinful man is destructive, sinful man is selfish, and sinful man is deceitful. He had gone through his own personal painful experiences with people and the insincerity and baseness, right? The end of verse 4, they bless with their mouth. They seem to care about me. They talk like they're a friend and they're looking for my best interest, but inwardly they are a curse. There's curses within. David had his fair share of that. He says, man is unreliable. You can't trust. Can't be your place of security. So with that contemplation, then, notice with me, he moves into verses 5 and following. Here he's going to give his reaffirmation. He is going to use the same terminology used in verses 1 and 2. He's going to speak with more confidence in this. He's going to also amplify this, but he's going to continue the thought that this statement of faith, that there is security found in only God and God alone. So first he's going to do this. He's going to apply this to himself, verses 5 and 6. He's going to expound on it in verse 7. And then he's going to admonish the people to do the same, verse 8. So that's this next section. But notice with me, David is going to do this. He's going to say 3 things we need to do. And he's going to talk to himself and encourage himself. First thing is, he's going to say you need to be still and wait, verse 5. Verse 6, you need to be sure. And verse 7, you need to be strong. Now we'll find that in all of these things, they are focused on God. It is about relying upon God. But here's what's intriguing to me. Notice verse 5. He says this, my soul, wait in silence for God only. Now, I got to ask you, all right? Think about that last statement, wait in silence for God only. What is the most difficult part of that for you? What is the most difficult part of that for you? When you look at this statement, wait in silence, right? Wait in silence for God only. Maybe it's the waiting element, right? Maybe you're a doer. You just have to do things. You can't sit still. I can't wait on God to do something. I got to make something happen. You're not the kind of person who looks for open doors, prays for open doors. You're the one who kicks doors open. And when things are difficult, you're trying to push God's hand and make Him do what you want. You just can't sit still and wait for God in His timing. There's no submission, right? Just got to do. Or maybe you say, you know what? I can wait, but I have trouble being silent. Well, I'll wait for God's timing, but while I wait, I'm going to let Him know how I feel about all of this, right? I'm going to grumble and I'm going to complain and I'm going to nag, and maybe if I nag Him enough and complain enough, He'll actually do something. And so we go on with all of our dissatisfactions. I don't know why I'm going through this. I don't deserve to be treated this way. I don't deserve to go through all of this. And on we go. Sometimes we say, well, look, I can wait and I can do it in silence. But that in God only part, I have a problem. You see, there's contingencies, man, right? There's things that might happen. Well, I understand it, but what if this, or what if that, or what if that? So I've got to make sure that I have all these contingencies in place just in case. But here's the thing. If you do that, then you don't really trust God. Because what you're saying is that when and if God fails, I've got all these backups. Then you really don't think that God can do. So let me just lay it out for you that there are some things involved in this statement that he says, be still and wait. Wait in silence for God only. First, it involves submission. It involves submission. It involves this acquiescing to the promises of God and His Word, yieldingly resting in His promises. The psalmist said in Psalm 19, my soul cleaves to the dust. Revive me according to your word. You could even translate that promises. Your word to us of what you will do, the promises that you make. Not only that, but you must also put a place of supremacy in regards to the Word of God. You need to see that there is a supreme place that the Word of God should take in your life. Not only that, but there needs to be a bowing to the sovereignty of God and waiting silently in God only. You understand? He's in control. That is the big delusion for us, folks. That is that we think we control. We don't. We don't. And not only that, but it also requires suppressing all of the murmuring, inward murmuring and dissatisfaction that we have. You need to submit. You need to surrender yourself to God. You need to trust in His promises. Put primal place to His Word in your life. Bow to His sovereignty. And suppress all of that grumbling and dissatisfaction. And I'll just tell you that sometimes if you can't wait, He'll make you wait. He will make you wait until you have put all of those things aside, until you have set aside all your resources, all your reliances, until finally there's just God. Then He will do something. But He loves you that much. He loves you that much. So notice with me. Last two things in this section. Verse 6, be sure. Notice, I shall not be shaken. The confidence is grown. And the other, verse 7, be strong. Be strong, but it's not in our strength. On God my salvation and my glory rests. The rock of my strength, my refuge, is in God. So now then comes the appeal to others, verse 8. Trust in Him at all times, O people. Pour out your heart before Him. God is a refuge for us. David is going to answer three questions in this verse, verse 8. The first one is this, what should we do? The second is, when should we do it? And the third is, why should we do it? But it's all about trusting God. The first question he answers in verse 1. What do? We need to trust in Him and pour our heart out to Him. I was thinking about this because David reflects on the strength right? The strength and stability of God. He's the rock. But here's the thing. Although God is the rock when it comes to stability and strength, he's not insensitive and unfeeling like a rock. He really cares for you. David says you can pour your heart out to him. Pour your heart out to him. But you know what else is amazing about this thought, though, in relation to trusting in him, this pouring out your heart to him, means that you can trust God and rely upon him. In other words, you can expose yourself to God. You can be vulnerable. Look at verse 3. David was in a vulnerable situation like a leaning wall and a tottering fence. And there were those who took advantage of his weakness and vulnerability. They wanted to destroy him. I had a friend who was a pastor in the East Coast. Went to seminary with him. And he took a pastor in the East Coast. He and his wife, at the time, they had 10 kids. Some were their own. Some were adopted. And others were from foster care. And they had 10 kids. And things were being stretched for them. They were in a bad place. And ministry at church was stretching him out. And so the elders had told them, they came alongside him early on. They said, we're here for you. We want to come alongside of you and to encourage you and to strengthen you and be there for you. So he was going through this difficult time dealing with the state and all of that, foster care and everything else. Finances were stretched. He had to agree. He was being stretched at church. And he finally came to the elders and he just bore his soul to them and opened up to them. Well, they took that and they used that to try and destroy him. In a sense, they did destroy him. He's no longer pastor. He left the church. They sought him out in every area of his life and tried to disrupt him and tried to destroy his life. And in a sense, they did. He came and opened himself up to them and they took advantage of that. David says, God will never do that to you. Isn't that awesome? You can pour out your sorrows. You can pour out your frustrations. You can make yourself known. You can make yourself vulnerable to God. And he will be there for you. And he will never take advantage of that. Amen. You can trust him. You can trust him. And David says, when do you do this? Notice verse 8. You do it all the time. Trust him at all times. And why should we do this? The end of verse 8. Notice this. Why should we do this? Because God is a refuge for us. He is our safety. So David is going to contemplate again. He has to do this. And he's going to talk about in the next two verses, 9 and 10, security that cannot be found anywhere else. And we've dwelt on this. We're not going to dwell on this. Man and money are unreliable. He's going to talk about trusting in this false security, verses 9 and 10. Trusting in men, trusting in might, trusting in money. That's verses 9 and 10. Here's the thing about all three of these things. They're all transient in and of themselves. They don't last. They don't last. You look at Psalm 146, and it talks about who do we rely on, and we don't rely on men, even on the princes, right? Even those who rule well, even those who have good ideas, because the psalmist reveals to us in Psalm 146 that they are mortal men, that they also die, and when they die, their plans go with them. So yes, we can vote for whoever we vote for, but understand, don't hang all your hopes and dreams upon one man. Because no matter how good he is, no matter how good his plans are, he is mortal, and he will die, and when he dies, all his plans go with him. There is only one who is eternal. There is one who is everlasting, and that is God. That is God. Everything else is transient. Comes and goes, and we all know, right? I don't even touch paychecks anymore. They just write to my wife, they're gone. Right? My kids, it's funny, we have a running joke. My kids ask me at the store, Dad, got a couple bucks? I never have money in my pocket. No, I just don't, right? Can't rely on that stuff. It's transient, comes and goes. So David's going to end with this. Security can only be found in God because of his unique character, verses 11 and 12. He gets our attention in talking about the Word of God, and then he's going to talk about the ways of God. And he's going to deep down, he's going to deal with the issue of God's character manifested in his ways. But notice this, verse 11. This is the attention getter. Once God has spoken, twice I have heard this. It's just a device to get us to listen. Right? Hey, what's he going to say? What's he going to say? Here it is. The end of verse 11. That power belongs to God. Now, David can't stay there because he has to, as he dwells upon the power of God, he dwells upon his loving kindness. This is Chesed. This is God's covenant love, his faithfulness to his people. And when he dwells on that, he needs to reflect on the fact, for you recompense a man according to his work. God holds man accountable. So, people might take advantage of David. They might seek his life. They might seek to destroy him. But in the end, they're going to answer to God. So I don't need to sweat it. right? I don't need to seek revenge and retaliation. I don't need to go after them. I just trust God, and that's it. So I'm going to end with this question, and here it is. If this is all true of who God is, if only in God can my soul wait in silence, if He is my rock, my salvation, my stronghold, if He is my strength in all of that, then why then should I tense with fear and anxiety when troubles come in my life? When all of these things are true of God, when strength and power belongs to Him, when loving kindness and ever faithfulness to His people belong to Him, when He is going to hold all accountable for what they do in this life, if all of that is true, then why in the world do I tense up with fear and anxiety when trouble hits me in